So something that I always tell my students that's cool about poetry is it doesn't have to declare itself fiction or nonfiction unless the poet wants to. So, you go in a bookstore, there's the fiction section, the nonfiction section, and there's poetry. So I'll tell you that this poem does weave together a number of facts and narratives that are all true, including the references to the white squirrels of Brevard, North Carolina. I know the white squirrels. Cool. The unsolved theft of the painting that's referred to in the poem. And also, too true, too common, the violence alluded to. Sexual assault, psychological abuse, the misuse of religion to justify or cover up crimes against children. I do understand that some may ask whether this is appropriate material to read in a church. But what would it mean to say that a church is not the place to talk about difficult truths and injustice? So a couple other things to set up the poem. Trompe-l'oeil is a style of still life painting in which objects are portrayed in photographic, realistic detail, or something that deceives the senses. The poem begins with an epigraph about an 18th century painting, and in this, it's a picture of a dead duck hanging upside down, pinned by 1 foot to a wall. Then there's a crumpled piece of paper and a table covered up by a scrunched up cloth, candlestick, round bowl, but all of the objects are white. But because of the nuance of light and shadow, they don't blur together. You can see the objects. And so what the artist is showing is that what we see as white is actually many gradations of color. And so that idea at the time made this painting radical. Simulacrum means representation or imitation. And those facts that I mentioned in the poem has all true, even the ones related to the moon pie production. So if you like moon pies, apologies. This reality show. Still life with white. After Jean-Baptiste Udry, who set the style for the light-filled still life of the Rococo and illustrated his theory in his Etude d'Argent, a painting that caused a furor at the Salon in 1753. Still life, a history. At the moon pie factory, gravity begins the line. Attic vats of marshmallow batter, a man called Red churns decades with an oar. White water, the river is deadly, yet too shallow to sound. Udry on painting the many gradations of white. One is not the other. Bone china, the hungered plate. Ivory napkin balled in the fist of peace and quiet. Sunday dinner's white-knuckled wake of another tabled week. The sun didn't come forward to be washed white in the blood of the Lamb. Fathom as first music heard of the word, you are a waste. That melody voiced from a white fugue of bedroom walls, even before the crib's bars drop down to what ratchets and mutes, but washes over always as a white-capped rippling of waves. Breakers, falls. Rapids are ranked by air and trained into water, but anyone who's lived on its skin knows the terror and capsizing is not being borne by a head of froth, but the veil that held away the hard body bolt beneath being rent. White the head of the hymn's held note. White the sheet that stems the music. White the furor uncurtained by Audrey's big reveal, not for his fine-tuning the hand to temptation, but for the white duck's not being lost to the white wall he'd imagined it strung against. White without whiteouts, blizzard vertigo scrimming sky to field to a highway's dotted white breakage, blurred to the swim of breathed ice, no one came to break from a white-masked cow's glazed face. White gown, white hood, white the hemmed garments of the chosen to be chosen. Not albinos, but mutants, the white squirrels of Transylvania County, descend from a single carnival-fled pair, all so puppet-wicked by genetic memory that alarm still spread eagles them against black oak trunks as the white hooded raptor dives down. Rapture catching the congregants in fire, the boy cold ash, white shame, white anger, white flag of the spread open body. Not the talons of a stranger, but the sizzle at the crossing of wires. White spark, white ash, white the saddling weight of sugar sacks unloaded from boxcars, docked to the factory spurs, two taut strings. The Christmas morning, the father caught the son picking out Amazing Grace on the guitar. He took the gift away for good, because God's music is only what's held within his given body, a cavern of sweetly steeped organs. Glint of his ring making O's of moonlight, the fretted world clacking away on its slats. A sheep slaughtered in a country of ice and volcanoes revives a year's cooled eruption through the embered sheen of her lungs. Without slicing open the body, who'd know she'd breathed her entire life as stone? Little lamb, how your father must have drawn heart from the white listing of deacon after deacon to continuing visitation upon his child and the family kept intact, tucked in, tacked to bed sheets, arms pinned like the veined cellophane wings of a crane fly, stuck to strokes brushed through oil. And trompe l'oeil, who can resist putting out a hand to pick the oily fruit? If idle hands are the devil's playground, let us consider the work of our own. The white duck hanging from a tag signed with the maker's name is not the white wall it's been backed against. Because in the book of life, the names are few and composed not of the born, but the born into grace as immersion. To choose not to be swallowed is a stain on the white garments of the Father's heavenly dress, whereas the surviving mystery of the white duck is who sliced it from its frame. Treasures on earth as in heaven, white loaf that feeds the many. When moon pie cookies are cut, the lace of dough severed from circles is saved, slung back into the machine, punched into cutouts of sweetness itself. But crystallized, frame by frame, is how the memories return, like the tiny chilled eggs in the Sunday hen your mother split open to show you how those shrinking jelly globes trail back into the body like a reverse stop-action film of the baseball coming at you from his hand. White belly twisting between seams of red thread. Black plugs of tobacco like pellets taken into the mouth. Because family is a chain. When Sunday after Sunday you did not go down, the anger your father felt was for his own salvation. that sentence of little O's trailing to a simulacrum of perspective, a facsimile of eternity spliced by the body's beginning and end. The lost history of ice, compression, Wilon's windmills, Swiss cheese with melt, the retreating glacial snout, those jagged bites climbing the ice, footsteps masked by crampons, little machines blading the soul with an armored silver lining forged to a foxtrap's frame, to mandible split from skull, lacquered the thinnest layer of gleam, arm, both anchor and axe. Whether the duck was stilled with a twist of human hands or the preferred firearm of the time, swerve indelibly stamped in its finish, the Damascus barrels coiling strips of iron and steel, permitting shooting even mid-flight, is not pictured. If the not white thread in the white is what makes white visible as white, if the Father is the machine of God, the worker of his own hands, explain those nights the mercy of memory reversed, washed clean into whiteout for decades. A cappella, a boy learns to sing by picking out his father's voice, straining to match what nature's placed out of his range. White pillar, fisted between red columns of word. How recover the weeping salt of the body without winding again in those dampened sheets? Udry was famous as the Wizard of Whites, but that man heading the moon pie line, not whether father or son or the sizzle at the crossing is what I know, but only into each batter vat as he tipped it towards the final vanilla sheathing, he spit a single stream of tobacco juice. Because father meant word and grace, that ribbon of white flicking away in the upward flight of morning doves pools still to the hood of an eagle shot to a graveled shoulder. What protected means to the one who can depend on the light always to have his back. Little lamb, you unpeel the silvered foil. Again you bite through the bitter vein, slip to beget that exacting marshmallow white. All right, so there's two more poems. These are both going to be set in the Galapagos. And two more cool creatures. So one of the islands of the Galapagos, Isabella, feral goats had nearly destroyed the vegetation on the island. And you know, this is the place where there are these amazing tortoises that are different on each island. And so the goats were completely destroying the habitat for the tortoises, and they were dying out. So from 2004 to 2006, environmentalists carried out a program called Project Isabella, where they killed out the 100,000 goats that were living on the island. So what they would do is they shot them from helicopters above. And so that worked well at first, but in the last stages, you know, the goats kind of caught on finally, and they were hiding in the stones where they could hide, so they couldn't get those last ones from the helicopters. So for that, they needed to create the Judas goats. So what they did was take some female goats, and they would take the female goat, sterilize her. If she was pregnant, they would kill the fetus, and then they would inject her with hormones that would attract the males. And because goats are such social creatures, once the males come out, all the other goats would follow. So they would drop a Judas goat in an area, give it some time, all the goats would come out, and then they would come back with their helicopters and shoot them all, except for the Judas goat, that they would pick up and then take to another place. And they did that until finally all that was left were the Judas goats. So this poem kind of imagines what it might have been like to be one of the Judas goats. It's a persona poem. Still with Judas goats. Project Isabella, Galapagos. Selection began the terror. How I loved my new necklace, his glittering noosed ear always upon me. When he came first from the sky, when he slipped the hood over my horns, stood me onto my shoulders, I felt a sting, a clip, a brightness distancing my body. As what had quickened in me stilled in his hands, I knew he couldn't bear to share me. Shot with the needle dripping unending desire of others for me, didn't I dutifully draw my kind from their caves, making again our little society? Forgive me. Those days I almost forgot him. When the five-bladed sky powered its seraphim shadow upon us, how we ran, I with them, the ones who'd mounted me, the little ones racing still for their mother's teats, how they dropped to their knees, their legs snapped broomsticks, leaves still spun from the glassy corners of their mouths, their fur glistening with rain-sleek roses, lipsticked kisses blown from their bodies. But wasn't I the beloved, the one left, taken again under his wings until it all again began? How many times this occurred is beyond my measure. Finally, I could gather only those like me, the startled girls, each of us taken in to believe we were the one. We knew each other by our war-slicked eyes, the echo of our future-emptied bodies, how we each wore the charm of his listening around our neck. And no more did the sky empty upon us, no more did he come for us. The grass grew lush under our few hooves, for we did not increase. And the great ones, who had long withered inside their domed shells, began again to move among us. The ones we now knew all had been done for, though we were left freely to eat what we would, what would have fed so many lost we'd led. Oh God, in the whirling machine, didn't we well bring your weather down? Now we bow our heads only to the recovering green. So this last poem also set in the Galapagos. So you know Darwin, of course, traveled there in 1835 as a captain's companion. And what he saw of the differentiated species on the different Galapagos Islands are at the heart of his theory of evolution. So this is about the marine iguana. A couple things related to them. So they have traditionally lived through the El Nino cycles, where there would be a hard year, and then there would be La Nina, and then another hard year, and they would survive it. But now, of course, the weather is changing, and there are more and more of those hard years. The marine iguana is the only lizard that lives off food underwater. And so it dives for the algae that it eats, and it's hugely salty. And so their bodies are adapted so that they will sneeze salt when they're on land to get out the excess salt so they're not poisoned by it. So when you go and you see this like huge colony, they just like stacked on top of each other, these marine iguanas, you hear this as they're just sneezing this salt out. And of course the cool thing about the animals on the Galapagos is they have no fear of humans, so you can approach us as closely as you'd like. Still life with evolution. Amblyrhynchus cristatus, marine iguana, Perennitina Galapagos. Never was a dry eye into the continent, never a land bridge, but a raft of storm trash, and twisted into the trees' risen roots, woven into wreaths of floating mangrove, the long-snouted ancestor, that captain companion's Darwin, stumbled into their beginning from. That human eyes, like a bird's, can mirror the viewer, can hold her as a tiny floating thing, is a condition, not the accomplishment of empathy, which is weightless, as he skeletons a wind skitters, wedging to crooks between rocks the curved spines, vertebrae puzzled knuckle to knuckle. Some, like antique ivory cones, the teeth snapped off. Some still rayed with ribs like the straws of lost wax castings, splayed to a galley's oars, stalled as the day the sea glassed and the Spanish bishop's sails unspooled, drawing him near enough to be appalled, less by their hundreds braiding to a mast ropey as the pahoehoe bones bearing them, than by their likeness, that face isolation's million generations had blunted so near his own. Scaled to minute pyramids, brutalist castles, the forehead is distance ranged as caldera-capped peaks, a lace skull cap of sneezed salts. Because what sustains, too long held, poisons, and what they must eat swells so richly with it, the motes lacing the scales' pinnacled plates pulse neon green with the crystalline desiccation of seaweed the largest will die for, straight into the frigid surf, dropping them degree by degree towards muscles freeze and no more rising. So tuned to what halos, half their work is warming, spread-eagled, beanbag heavy against a shelf of black rock, all glass and pocketed air, where flat on my stomach I lay to meet the calved gem bones of one's eyes. So close, my breath, where this some northern winter might have gloved him. Yet no flinch, no turn. To be held in such trust is to be at once invisible and so deeply seen that no reflection mars the eye unblinking. Though in truth, this grace they'll grant anything not hawk, their one predator on this still cat-free island. Nothing here yet feral, nothing yet slipping into burrows, sliding their leathery eggs down throats fluent as 5 centuries of naming waiting their backs, like the hawk descending, who cannot both fight and lift the heaviest, who must press his prey against the noon-warm stone until it stills. Imps of darkness, hideous creatures, cooking the body in its own skin, not to death, but paralysis, flipping it, ripping into the soft belly to begin. Tiny T-Rex, mini Godzilla, ancient days come once more to earth. The mockingbird's alert call, the one sound true. A one-noted, deep-throated strobe, meaning hawk, they've learned to distinguish from the bird's trilling song. To survive a lean year, the seaweed's dying down. They'll digest their own bones. The pattern was predictable. A year's warmed water to be followed by many more cooling. Those with the deepest hunger, who could not hold out even a single season, those skeletons are theirs, lacing the black boulders, devolving toward air. Good bones, we say of a house worth saving. Good bones. Such stiff grace, such sinuous articulation, the long tails propelling them through the rough current, the limbs, their outsized claws, held tight and still against the rigid torso, the dorsal crest ash-green spines, a fringed fin arcing the surface it parts. The architecture of the body is arc and cage, and home is another island's harbor, where a grounded hull, lisping starboard, ribbons out oil, silking to an iridescent skin. Beauty isn't truth, what cannot be scooped in nets, what cannot be scrubbed from the chosen few plucked from blackened beaches. The temperature scaling beyond the seaweed's bearing. Unchained offshore, my ship purrs. I was never harmless, though I lay as still as a breathing body might. Cooling by facing head-on the heat, the colony orients entire towards the noon sun, their silence punctuated as with coughs in a darkening theater by this sibilance, expelling the one poison they've been gifted a world of time to grow to. Never will be a land bridge. Never is a dry eye into every continent. In my breath, the flood and the fire rising, and beyond, the sound of a great gathering, listening. Thank you.